there is clearly a split in the body politic, oftentimes along racial lines, over whether some form of financial compensation as reparations should be paid to African Americans. You have members of the U.S. Senate who have gone on record saying no one alive today is responsible for slavery. And that's why I think it's important to remind people, yeah, slavery was one part of the story, but Jim Crow and mass incarceration is another part. The way we think of reparations is really a story about acknowledgement. Some attempt to think about atonement, and atonement then requires a conversation about restitution, which hopefully will lead to a certain part of repair. And at least in one perspective, after acknowledgement and atonement and repair, there may be closure. The challenge is, of course, not to repeat harms. But with African Americans, I'd like to argue there are at least three chapters. There's the long chapter of slavery from 1619 to 1865, and that's about 60% of what we think of as American history. So the institution of slavery, the political economy of slavery, was an organizing principle for what became the United States before it existed, and certainly through 1865. Thereafter, we go through a period of Reconstruction, which was then quickly replaced by redemption and segregation. And segregation was sort of the second period of intense subordination of African Americans. Oftentimes it's referred to as Jim Crow, but it really was a system of either de jure, that is by law, or by custom, de facto segregation. That ended somewhere in the 1960s, early 1970s. But by the 1980s, we get to what I think of as the third period, is the period of mass incarceration, and where a disproportionate number of Native men and women, African American men and women, and Latinos and Latinas found themselves in prison, in a way, in part because we shifted from a war on poverty to a war on crime. The work of reparations has its own long historical tale. And so if you go back to roughly 1783, and a woman, Belinda Sutton, petitioned the Commonwealth of Massachusetts through the royal family, where she had been owned, for reparations at the end of the American Revolutionary War. If you fast forward almost 100 years to the 1870s, you get another chapter, a woman, Henrietta Wood, who had been born into slavery in Kentucky and Alabama, and then made her way from slavery to freedom in Cincinnati, only to be stolen back into slavery, and where she spent the next 15 years of her life, up and through the end of the Civil War, re-enslaved. She sued the person who stole her back into slavery, and she won. And what African Americans have been arguing, okay, is one, if it's only a series of one-offs, then that doesn't address the 4 million or so men and women and children who have found themselves as bondage and who were then manumitted after the end of the Civil War, but left with no land, no clothing, little education, no form of resources, and they had to go out and make it on their own. It's not as if the United States has never had examples of reparations. We paid the Italian government reparations after we killed Italian immigrants who ended up being murdered in Louisiana. We provided reparations to Native Alaskans after Alaska became part of the Union, and where 44 million acres of land were preserved for Native Alaskans. Of course, the one that most people refer to is the 1988 passage of the Civil Liberties Act, where the government provided financial reparations for Japanese Americans who had been interned. The stories that people tell are the stories that are key to a period of national healing. We have not actually experienced that national healing, and as a result, our racial past keeps becoming our racial present. We're trying to engage a project that, while it relies upon the scholarly data that are available, it also is informed by the experiences and stories of individuals. We have community partners across the nation who are gathering these local stories. And so we build it one piece at a time, one community at a time, one state at a time. And I believe that if we move this from, in our case, a single project to being part of a larger movement, that movement will, over time, will succeed.